They're sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that could be good to our economy. So I want to keep helping our friends in Ukraine. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of.
A prominent U.S. politician has repeatedly said the quiet part loud, arguing that the United States and the West must continue supporting Ukraine, sending it more and more weapons in a proxy war against Russia because it has trillions of dollars of minerals that Western countries want to get access to, including some strategic minerals that are needed for advanced technologies. This has been argued by the US Senator Lindsey Graham from the Republican Party. He is a notorious war hawk, and he has taken repeated trips to Ukraine. During his latest trip in September, the US Senator published a video standing next to Ukraine's Western-backed leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. And in this video clip, he said very clearly, "We must continue supporting Ukraine, in no small part due to the fact that it has trillions of dollars of minerals."
I'm here with President Zelensky. I am such an admirer of what you and your country have done. You're trying to stop the Russians so we don't have to fight them. They don't want any American troops. They just need the weapons to free their country of a terrible invasion. They're sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that could be good to our economy. So I want to keep helping our friends in Ukraine. We can win this. They need our help.
Yes, we need, and we have already, the biggest help is the support of American people and support of our friends, thanks to Lindsey and his colleagues, to congressmen and senators from the United States. Thanks for this support, bipartisan support. Thank you so much.
Peace is coming.
Yes, soon.
Note how Lindsey Graham also argued that the West had to support Ukraine in order to fight Russia, so the West doesn't have to fight Russia on its own territory. This is an example of what people have said is the strategy of fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. Now, this is not the first time that Lindsey Graham has publicly salivated over the trillions of dollars of minerals in Ukraine. The US Senator made very similar comments in June in an interview on CBS. He referred to Ukraine as a gold mine. He argued that the West cannot afford to allow those minerals to fall into the hands of the evil Russians and China. And he said that Ukraine could be the best business partner that the West has ever dreamed of.
What did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
When you see people in the West argue that NATO has to keep sending billions and billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine in order to defend democracy and human rights, you should never forget those clips that we just saw there. They are very revealing about the ulterior motives of Western countries in Ukraine. Now, even some mainstream US media outlets have reported on this. The Washington Post, in fact, referred to the war in Ukraine as a battle for the nation's mineral and energy wealth. In this report back in 2022, the Washington Post noted, quote, "Ukraine harbors some of the world's largest reserves of titanium and iron ore, fields of untapped lithium, and massive deposits of coal. Collectively, they are worth tens of trillions of dollars," end quote. The Washington Post noted that in addition to having oil and coal and natural gas, Ukraine also has rare earth minerals. And this article noted that these include, quote, significant amounts of other valuable energy and mineral deposits used for everything from aircraft parts to smartphones, end quote. And it also added that these rare earth minerals that are located in Ukraine are, quote, essential for certain high-tech components that could hamper Western Europe's search for alternatives to imports from Russia and China, end quote. This point is absolutely crucial. The US and Europe have been trying to seek alternative producers of some of these critical minerals because the reality is that China is a huge part of the global supply chain. And the US energy chief said that the US government is very concerned. China is responsible for approximately 60% of the entire world's production of rare earth minerals. And the US Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, said, quote, it's one of the pieces of the supply chain that we're very concerned about in the United States. We do not want to be over-reliant on countries whose values we may not share, end quote. In fact, in 2022, the Joe Biden White House announced a new initiative to try to diversify the U.S. critical minerals supply chain for rare earth elements, especially, and lithium and cobalt. These are minerals that are needed for clean energy technologies like batteries, electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, and more. And the Biden administration has not only put tariffs on Chinese products and Chinese minerals, and it put export restrictions and sanctions on China, but furthermore, the Biden administration is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in its own domestic capacities for production to try to weaken China. And can you guess which country has been extremely important in Washington's attempt to weaken China and Russia and their influence in the global supply chain for critical minerals? You guessed it, Ukraine. In 2021, the official code of laws of the United States was updated and included a new section titled Cooperation between the United States and Ukraine regarding the titanium industry. And this is written into the letter of U.S. law. And it states, quote, it is the policy of the United States to engage with the government of Ukraine on cooperation in the titanium industry as a potential alternative to Chinese and Russian sources on which the United States and Europe currently depend. Of course, it's also corporations from the US and other Western countries that are profiting from this. Here at Geopolitical Economy Report, we've done extensive reporting on how Western governments have been imposing neoliberal economic policies on Ukraine, including mass privatization, selling off state-owned assets, and selling off natural resources to foreign companies. And at the same time, Ukraine has been viciously repressing its own workers, cutting workers' rights, basically making it illegal to form a union. In the description below, I will link to some of our reports on that. Ukraine's Western-backed leader, Zelensky, has been really cozying up closely with Wall Street, offering hundreds of billions of dollars of state sell-offs, investments for Western capitalists who are getting very wealthy, profiting off of buying up Ukraine. And Zelensky symbolically rang the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange, announcing that his country is open for business. He is quite literally selling his country to Western capitalists.
We are defending freedom and property. Together, we'll be able to start the difficult work of rebuilding Ukraine, our cities, our economy, our infrastructure. It is already clear that this will be the largest economic project of our time in Europe. It is obvious that American business can become the locomotive that will once again push forward global economic growth. We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants of the international financial and investment world as BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, such American brands as Starlink or Westinghouse, have already become part of our Ukrainian way. Your brilliant defense systems, such as HIMARS or Bradleys, are already uniting our history of freedom with your enterprises. We are waiting for Patriots. We are looking closely at Abrams. Thousands of such examples are possible, and everyone can become a big business by working with Ukraine in all sectors, from weapons and defense to construction, from communication to agriculture, from transport to IT, from banks to medicine. And I believe that freedom must always win. And I invite you to work with us right now.
So it is very concerning to see the cynicism of these Western governments that claim to support democracy and human rights while they are using Ukraine as a battering ram to try to wage a proxy war against Russia, fighting to the last Ukrainian. The average age of a Ukrainian soldier fighting on behalf of NATO on the front lines is now between 43 and 45. It is a horror show. I mean, it is so sad seeing this complete destruction of a nation. And yet the Western governments that keep expanding this war and pushing Ukrainians into the meat grinder on behalf of Western imperial hegemony, they are profiting. I mean, it is completely cynical. In 2015, academic experts in the West published a very interesting scholarly journal article that looked at the role of natural resources in armed conflicts around the world. They published an article that summarized their findings titled, "Fueling Conflict, the Role of Oil in Foreign Interventions." They noted that they found, quote, "statistical evidence that Central Intelligence Agency covert operations during the Cold War resulted in increased imports of United States goods from target countries without the same holding true for exports, and, quote, U.S. military assistance increased non-military bilateral trade flows with the recipient country," end quote. They also added, quote, "We found that oil production and known oil reserves are central factors motivating third-party military interventions. More specifically, we demonstrated that the higher the quantities of oil produced and are owned by a country at civil war, the higher the likelihood of third-party intervention. Moreover, we found that the tighter the oil market is, the higher the likelihood of third-party intervention," end quote. So if there are only a few countries that are major oil producers like the US, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the oil price is very high, and a country like the US wants to reduce the oil price, what it can try to do is force other countries to produce more oil. And one of the ways it can do that is through direct military intervention. And we've seen this repeatedly. And this academic article, these scholars noted, I'm reading again, quote, "While other factors also play a role, intervention is approximately 100 times more likely when the country at war has a high value of reserves and the intervening country has high oil imports than when the country at war has no oil reserves and the potential intervener has high oil exports," end quote. They found statistically that it is 100 times more likely that there is foreign intervention in a civil armed conflict if the country has oil and other major natural resources. Sounds familiar, right? Now, all of that said, I do want to be clear here. I'm not saying that the war in Ukraine is only about the massive mineral and energy reserves that Ukraine has. It's not only about natural resources. No war is ever only about one thing. Every war always has multiple causes, multiple reasons. But it would be very naive to ignore the role of strategic natural resources. Of course, there are many other important factors. There's the geopolitics, the location of Ukraine, which shares a massive border with Russia, and Ukraine was also used in order to invade the Soviet Union and Russia by the Third Reich during World War II. And if US NATO forces want to carry out a conventional direct war on Russia, they would very likely use Ukraine as their base of operations in order to invade Russia, and they would cut off the southern part of Russia from the northern part of Russia. This would cut off Russia's access to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. It would cut off Russia's access to the Caucasus and then further south into West Asia, the so-called Middle East. And of course, US NATO forces would like to cut off Russia's access to its only warm water base, which is in the port of Sevastopol in Crimea. This is why the West is so obsessed with Crimea and trying to take it back for Ukraine, because they want to prevent Russia from having access to the Black Sea. They want to turn Black Sea into a NATO sea, like the Mediterranean basically is. So for Russia, from a national security perspective, if Ukraine joins NATO, it would be an existential threat. It would be a massive base of operations used by the US and Western powers to try to destabilize, overthrow, invade Russia. I mean, this is why, for Russia, this is such a sensitive issue. And this isn't even to mention the extreme danger of nuclear weapons and what it would mean if Ukraine hosted US NATO nuclear weapons just right on Russia's borders that could easily target Moscow and other major Russian cities. So obviously, the war in Ukraine is about much, much more than just minerals, just natural resources. The geopolitics of the conflict are clearly very important. The national security implications, the Western war hawks who have salivated for decades over the possibility of invading Russia, colonizing Russia like they tried to do in the 1990s after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. These are all factors. Again, I'm not saying there's only one reason for the war in Ukraine, but what I am saying is that it's not about democracy and human rights. And anyone who believes that has the intellectual analysis of a child. This is extremely naive. This is not how the world works. That is the propaganda that Western governments and their obedient mouthpieces in the corporate media regurgitate, but don't take them at their word. Some of these Western officials, like the US Senator Lindsey Graham, sometimes say the quiet part loud and admit that they have ulterior motives driving this conflict. Now, before I conclude, I want to look at another similar example that we saw during the war in Afghanistan. For 20 years, US NATO forces were militarily occupying Afghanistan, and Donald Trump, when he was president, he openly said the quiet part loud once again, and he admitted that the Western powers and the big corporations that fund Western governments wanted to get access to the trillions of dollars of minerals located in Afghanistan. There was an article published about this in Reuters back in 2017 titled, "The Victor, the Spoils, Trump Eyes Afghanistan's Elusive Mineral Riches." The report noted that US President Donald Trump is eyeing Afghanistan's mineral wealth with deposits estimated to have a potential value of $1 trillion. The report noted that Afghanistan has deposits of gold, silver, and platinum. It also has iron ore, uranium, zinc, tantalum, bauxite, coal, natural gas, and significant copper. And Reuters said, Afghanistan even has the potential to become the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And of course, lithium, also known as white gold, is absolutely crucial for new cutting-edge technologies, especially in the green transition with renewable technologies like solar panels and wind turbines, also batteries used in car electric vehicles and phones and laptops. The New York Times also published an article back in 2017 that it featured interviews with top officials in the Donald Trump administration, And this report reveals how they were trying to exploit some of the vast mineral reserves in Afghanistan. This article noted, quote, Trump has discussed the country's mineral deposits with President Ashraf Ghani, who promoted mining as an economic opportunity in one of their conversations, end quote. And I should point out that Ashraf Ghani, who was the Western puppet leader of Afghanistan, he was a US-trained neoliberal economist obsessed with the so-called free market, and he wrote a book that is just full of these neoliberal free market platitudes about how countries can develop by privatizing everything and simply allowing foreign corporations to buy up all of their assets. I mean, he really is the perfect example of one of these neoliberal puppets created by, the World Bank and the IMF. In this article in the New York Times, it noted that there was a billionaire who also was advising Trump on Afghanistan named Steven Feinberg. And this billionaire was looking into ways to exploit Afghanistan's minerals. So Trump, who's of course a billionaire and who did big tax cuts for fellow billionaires, he was working with his billionaire friends to try to invest and exploit Afghanistan's mineral reserves. And this report noted that this billionaire, Steven Feinberg, owns a large military contractor, DynCorp, which could play a key role in guarding mines in Afghanistan. DynCorp has received many billions of dollars of contracts from the US government. And this report noted that in 2010, US officials estimated that Afghanistan had untapped mineral deposits worth $1 trillion. And by the way, with inflation, $1 trillion back in 2010 would be 1.44 trillion today. And I should point out that it was not just Donald Trump who was trying to exploit Afghanistan's natural resources. This is bipartisan. Previous presidents did the same. The New York Times notes that in 2006, the George W. Bush administration conducted aerial surveys of Afghanistan to map its mineral resources. And also, under the Democrat Barack Obama, the Pentagon set up a task force to try to build a mining industry in Afghanistan. So this is bipartisan, like most of the worst crimes committed by the US government. And by the way, while we're on the subject of Afghanistan's resources, Afghanistan was also the world's leading producer of opium poppy, which is needed for heroin. And the Financial Times published a very interesting report that noted that since US NATO forces left Afghanistan, opium production has collapsed. The Financial Times noted that after US NATO forces ended their 20-year military occupation of Afghanistan, there was a 99% fall in poppy production in the largest province in Afghanistan, which is Helmand province. This region previously grew more than half of all of the country's opium. They have a chart here that is incredible. It shows how in just 1 year, opium production completely collapsed. And at the same time, by the way, Afghan farmers nearly doubled their production of wheat, which obviously you can use to eat. It's a much more important crop. And the Financial Times pointed out that Afghanistan supplies the majority of the world's illegal heroin. So during the US NATO military occupation for 20 years, Afghanistan became the world's heroin capital, providing the majority of the world's heroin. And then after US NATO forces left, the heroin trade in Afghanistan collapsed. What a coincidence. These are just a few examples. You can point out many other examples throughout history, like the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, in which the CIA and the US military was using the heroin trade to fund some of their illegal operations. And this was famously exposed by the award-winning historian Alfred McCoy in his book, The Politics of Heroin, CIA Complicity in the Global Drug Trade, an absolute classic. But we can see historic echoes of those controversies from back in the Vietnam War and the Korean War. Today, we can see those echoes in the proxy war in Ukraine. And there's no end to the corruption and the cynicism and the exploitation. And these are the kinds of things that we report on here at Geopolitical Economy Report. Unfortunately, they're chronically undercovered, ignored, distorted in the mainstream corporate media. That's why we do the work that we do. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I'm Ben Norton, the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. And if you like the work that we do, please consider supporting us. You can donate in several ways if you go to geopoliticaleconomy.com/support. The best way is you can go to patreon.com/geopoliticaleconomy and become a patron. We are completely independent. We rely entirely on small donations from viewers and listeners and readers. We have no institutional support, no big donors. We are grassroots media. And I want to thank everyone again for joining me. We will be back soon. See you next time.